Hey, Andy, it's great to see you. Welcome to Nerd TV.
Thanks. Good to see you.
What do you think Nerd TV is?
Well, you described it to me as Charlie Rose for Nerds. So it's an interview show focusing on technical issues of the day, maybe a little bit of history.
Yeah. The only thing, we couldn't afford the table.
Yeah.
So we do it without the table. But otherwise, it's the same. And of course, Charlie's not here. So you are best known for doing system software for the Macintosh. But can you, for the viewers who don't know you, give us a little short resume of where you came from, what you do?
Sure. I was a grad student at UC Berkeley in 1978 when I bought my Apple II, and it suddenly became a lot more interesting than school. So I just started focusing all my time being an Apple II hobbyist. Dropped out of grad school to go to work for Apple in August '79. Did some products for the Apple II. Most notably, the first small thermal low-cost printer for Apple, the Silent Type. I started on the Mac team in February of 1981. Wrote a lot of the initial system software for the Macintosh, including the user interface toolbox, the window manager, menu manager, control manager. Left Apple in, April of 1984, just pretty soon after the introduction. Helped my friend Burl Smith, who did the digital hardware for the Mac, start a company called Radius in 1986 that made peripherals for the Mac. Did a lot of stuff as a third-party developer, sold system software back to Apple. In 1990, along with Bill Atkinson, who was sort of my mentor on the Mac project, we started a company called General Magic. That made some of the first handheld computers, what they call a PDA, although I always thought that name was not such a good name.
Oh, it was John Scully's name.
Yeah, that's right.
No wonder
I could go into lots of details about that, but we had falling out with Apple in the course of... Apple was our benefactor at starting General Magic, but about a year into it, they decided they would rather be General Magic and tried to get us to blink out of existence, which we eventually did, but took a few years. And then in February, I left General Magic in 1996 to become an internet hobbyist. Got a T1 line to my house. At one point, I had all 4 food banks of the Bay Area hosted from this house here. And I got bitten by the free software bug in February of 1998, around the time of the Mozilla announcement. I was despairing about the structural problems in the software industry, and suddenly, after reading Eric Raymond's book, The Cathedral and the Bazaar, I realized that free software could be the path to an open and fair software industry. So I decided to devote myself to making that happen sooner. And ended up starting a company called Easel we started that in August of '99, trying to help make free software easier to use. Easel couldn't get its second round of funding though, so we had to shut down the company in May 2001. After that, I started working with Mitch Kapor, who's a tremendous character, the guy who designed Lotus 1-2-3, helping him get the Open Source Applications Foundation off the ground. We were developing an innovative personal information manager called Chandler. But in about a year and a half ago almost at this point, I took off from that to do a project, both writing down my memoirs, essentially reminiscing about the development of the Macintosh, but I developed some unique software to publish it on the web that I called the Folklore Project. I established a website called folklore.org devoted to what I call collective historical storytelling, allowing a group of people to cooperate at telling their shared stories. Published at the time, about 60 anecdotes about the development of the Mac on the web in time for the Mac's 20th birthday earlier this year in January. And then that led to a book. I actually have a book
to plug.
Yeah, I just got copies of. This is one of the only ones in the country now. It was printed in Italy, but this should be in the bookstores by the end of the year.
So, Revolution in the Valley, the insanely great story of how the Mac was made.
Yeah, not my title. Yeah. But I think the book turned out great.
That's terrific. Great. And it's available wherever books are sold?
I hope so.
That's the plan.
Yeah, you can buy it on Amazon today.
Well, you had an incredibly varied career, and I want to cover whatever you want to cover, but also some specific, some old stuff, some new stuff, some philosophical stuff, perhaps.
Sure.
What was it that excited you about the Apple II?
Oh boy, just owning my own computer. In those days, I was a grad student in computer science, and I'd like to get to the bottom of all the systems I worked on, but you weren't really allowed to. You have root permissions. And so I couldn't figure out some of the low-level I/O things, so I had a real drive to get my own computer. In fact, when I first got my Apple II, the first thing I did was turned it on and off, just because I had the power to do so, which I'd never had on a computer before. But I was surprised. I knew the Apple II was great when I bought it, but as I dug into the details, it just completely blew me away at the creative, artistic approach that the designers had taken. It was written by a madman genius, although I didn't know anything about it at the time. I could just see it in there, and it became that design style was so intoxicating to me that I ended up being drawn to Apple like a moth to a flame. I started at Apple about 18 months after I bought my Apple II.
Wow. What could you see? Steve Wozniak was the primary designer of the Apple II. And what could you see about his character in his product?
First thing is that he's a prankster. In some ways, the Apple II is his greatest prank. Was his incredible sense of humor, his idealism was you could see just in the code for the Apple II. His unique problem-solving approach, I guess, is the most apparent thing. The Apple II was not designed like an ordinary product. It used tricks, crazy tricks everywhere. I guess one of the very first things was just the realization of how the high-res screen worked. If you did, 280 by 192 pixels by 4 colors, you do the math, that requires a 12K frame buffer, but it only had 8K in the frame buffer. It's like, what's going on here? But then later you discover
what was going on?
What was going on here? He used a very clever trick of clocking the basic machine synchronous with color burst. So effectively, you could microprogram the NTSC signal. So it didn't really have. It was really only 1 bit per pixel. But because it was synchronous with color burst, depending on where you turned the pixels on, you could control what colors you got.
Wow, that's amazing. And what was it like when you met him?
Oh, I have a great story actually. I met him at the computer club. I was one of the founding members of the Apple Corps, which met April 1st, 1978 was its first meeting. It was kind of another April Fool's joke. But I was told by John Draper, who I'd met at the club, another legendary character.
Captain Crunch.
He was friends with Woz, and that Woz would be coming to the July meeting in San Francisco of the Apple Corps. So I positioned myself near the door, scrutinizing everyone who walked in, thinking I could tell Woz just by the glint in his eye. I had never seen a picture of him even, and I was able to kind of pick him out.
By his glint?
Yeah, by his smile and his just the way he carried himself. And later that afternoon, I ended up going out to lunch with Draper and Woz to Larry Blake's in Berkeley, where I remember being a little bit scared because they were talking about schemes for taking over communication satellites. This was still 1978. I was wondering if I'd get arrested from just attending the lunch.
Well, of course, they both came from the blue box era. And Draper with the Captain Crunch whistle, was well. I think he did some time, didn't he?
Yeah, on a couple occasions.
Yeah.
The Apple II was entered into a trial in Stroudsburg, Pennsylvania, as an instrument of crime.
Wow. When you were at UC Berkeley, was Bill Joy there then?
Yeah.
Did you know Bill at that time?
Yeah, I knew him. He was TA for me in one of my classes, and he spent more time than any other person at the terminal room. That was before he was able to get a terminal at his house. Just there, almost 24 hours a day, rewriting Unix a piece at a time.
Did he... I didn't know him. I mean, I know the guy, but I didn't know him then.
Yeah.
And I just wondered, as a TA, did he devote himself at all to the teaching part of it, or was that just a way to make money?
I don't know.
Did he care about you?
Yeah, he cared. Just about the technical stuff. Yeah. I'm not sure about personally, but he marked up a few of my papers and stuff, and I thought of him as a good TA.
Yeah. Isn't it funny how you meet people at certain points in your life, and then you meet them again later on, and You're that guy?
Yeah, he called me up shortly after the Macintosh introduction at Apple because, he remembered he knew me at Berkeley, although I hadn't talked to him much in between. I hadn't heard that he had founded Sun, but he had asked about the laser printer, which was under development. He wanted to set up a meeting with Steve Jobs, so I told Steve, hey, you ought to talk to this guy. He's one of the best programmers I ever met. Maybe you could hire him. I didn't know he was had already founded Sun.
For those who don't know, there was a project called the Macintosh, and Jeff Raskin was the head of it, and that was before Steve took it over.
That's right.
So it was another computer.
And Jeff deserves a lot of credit for putting together the vision of the Macintosh, which is the combination of extreme simplicity and ease of use and very high volume. And I think that stuck with it from Jeff's initial inception to when it came to market. And then Jeff's other exemplary contribution was putting together an amazing team. And Jeff himself, attracted Bill Atkinson to Apple. Hired Bud Tribble, Burl Smith, Joanna Hoffman, Brian Howard, put together the core team. So Steve already had a prototype and a team before he took it over.
Now, Jeff later did the Canon Cat.
Right.
Remember the Canon Cat?
For a company called Information Appliance.
Yeah. Was that like his version of the Mac?
Yeah, that was essentially, that's what I would say, that was very close to what he wanted to build with the Mac. Essentially a text-based interface. Jeff didn't want you to take your hands off the keyboard.
Yeah. I remember that he had the jump keys.
Yes, he called them the leap keys.
Leap keys, that's right, leap keys. And he was very resistant to putting in arrow keys.
Yeah.
And so you had to, you wanted to go one character, you had to leap it. You went, I want to
yes. Yeah, he had a lot of foibles like that. Like his software insisted on only having one file per floppy disk. Again, tilting toward simplicity at all costs.
Well, an information appliance.
Yes.
That's exactly it. When you came to the Macintosh team, you were in the Apple II group.
That's right.
How did that transition take place?
I tell the story in my book called Black Wednesday, which is a famous day in Apple history. I think it was February 26, 1981, where Mike Scott, who was the CEO of Apple at the time. A lot of people thought Steve Jobs was an early CEO of Apple. Of course, he never was until he came back in 1997. But Mike Scott, anyway, who's I love Mike Scott, but he was sometimes cantankerous. And I came into work one morning and found out he had fired about half the Apple II team because he had thought they were getting sort of fat and complacent and wanted to get us back to our old startup hustle. And including, he fired 3 out of the 4 managers on the Apple II team. That kind of freed me up. And so I was pretty disillusioned, though, at this firing, especially they fired a friend of mine who I thought was one of the best programmers at Apple at the time, a guy named Rick Riccio. I was ready to quit myself. Scotty heard that I was thinking about quitting Apple because of his actions, so he called me into his office and asked me what it would take to make me to stay, and I said, well, maybe if I could work on the Mac project, which Steve had just taken over from Jeff Raskin. In fact, when I finally started on the Mac, Steve put me in Jeff's desk, which he hadn't moved out of yet. I started going through the drawers, and I found like model airplanes and some cameras and stuff.
Did he ever get that stuff back?
I think so.
Yeah.
Not sure, though.
Is there, in doing a project like the Macintosh, is there an advantage to being young and strong?
Absolutely. To being idealistic, really helps you, overcome some of the many obstacles put in your path. But yeah, working long hours, being single helps because then you can your time is yours. Once you have a family, your time isn't all yours anymore. So, and most of the Mac team, we were in our mid-20s. Most of us were single, and we were able to essentially devote our lives to it.
And what was it that we established that Jeff put together the team and had a large part of the vision? What was it that Steve brought to the party?
Oh, Steve brought a ton to it. First and foremost was just the space to do something. The politics in a even a medium-sized company as Apple was at the time, from today's perspective, I guess you'd still call it a small company. It sure seemed like a large company to me, though by then having about 1,000 people almost. And the politics, the Mac could have run afoul of both the Apple II, which it was priced like, and the Lisa, which it operated like. So just creating the space to prevent it from letting a small team do its thing could only happen if under the auspices of one of the founders. But I think Steve's main contribution, besides just the pure leadership of, kind of setting the goal, is his passion for excellence. He's a perfectionist, and it's, good enough isn't good enough. Steve, and also his creative spirit, he really, really wants to do something great. And he'll make you do something great if you're not so inclined yourself. His incredible powers of persuasion. He can convince anyone of practically anything. And so it's really hard to do something like the Mac, and it takes a character like Steve to help make it happen.
So if Steve hadn't stepped in, would it have happened?
Yeah, no way. It would have just been another little footnote, a little research project that finally ran aground when one of the principals left to do something else. That's probably what would have happened.
Wow.
Apple probably wouldn't be here.
How the Mac was developed by a small team of people. Is there an ideal size of team? I mean, how?
Well, it depends on the nature of the project, but I would say the ideal size of any project is as small as possible, but no smaller, to paraphrase Albert Einstein, I guess.
And so the ideal size is one person?
Or one person, if they can do it, would be ideal, especially for a software project, because then you have no communication overhead. But typically, for a project like the Mac, the size we had was pretty good, which was, and it's different stages. The team obviously grows as eventually you have to write manuals and do testing and all of that, although the Mac had no formal test team. We used to say the final software for the Mac had 6 person-hours of testing, which was 12 people for a half hour. Literally, the final release was ready at 6 a.m. in the morning, or 5:30. It went off at 6 a.m.
And those 12 people you found at Denny's? I mean,
no, they were the software team.
Okay.
Plus a few hangers on.
A few hangers on.
Yeah, at the time we were doing that testing too, most of us were awake for the previous 48 hours.
Oh, Lord. Now, Burrell Smith is a great character in this, and some people think of him as a creation of Steve, or perhaps of Jeff, in the sense of coming out of the service department.
Right.
And there are a lot of organizations where that wouldn't have happened.
Yes.
And but also a brilliant designer and a kind of a wacky guy.
Yeah, he's a character.
The stories of Burrell going to lunch in the trunk.
Yeah.
I never.
Yeah, I didn't write that. I missed that in the book. I had that on my list, but I couldn't come up with a sharp enough way to write it. But Burrell, all it was really was there were more people than could fit in the back seat and the front seat, so Burrell volunteered to go in the trunk. We used to sometimes communicate by Morse code, or you could barely talk. Once we played a joke on him and left him in there for about 10 or 15 minutes after we got back. That wasn't very nice.
But there must have been something about this kind of womb-like experience that attracted him.
Oh, I think he was just trying to amuse his many fans.
His many fans. There you go. Was the success of the Macintosh less or more than you expected? What expectation did anyone have going into that?
We had high expectations. Part of Steve's role was to drum into us how important what we were doing actually would be to the world. Mm-hmm. And we understood that if we pulled it off, and obviously there was no guarantee that we would, but if we pulled it off, Apple was in a position to change the world with our work, and I think we did to a large extent. Now, it didn't have the commercial rewards necessarily that we thought we would for a variety of reasons. As you know, Microsoft eventually kind of grabbed the gold ring out of Apple's hands, I guess. But I think we had artistic values more than commercial values. That's one of the points I make in my book. And from the point of view of our artistic values, I think we succeeded beyond our wildest dreams.
Why did you choose to leave Apple?
Again, I tell the story in my book, but I had a bad manager, a manager who wanted me to salute to him. I didn't salute crisply enough.
Literally? Salute?
No, that's metaphorical.
Okay.
But he felt I call my story in the book Too Big for My Britches, because he took me for a walk to give me a verbal review how, for the period of time I wrote most of the Macintosh user interface software, he gave me a bad review because I was insubordinate to him. And that kind of disillusioned me. And so that took place in February 1983. And I would have left then, except I was too committed to the Mac. I had to stay to see it through. But as soon as it shipped in January 1984, I left.
Oh, wow.
Go work for a minute. I still was able to do system software. I did the first multitasking environment for the Mac just as an outsider, but I was able to sell it back to Apple. I wasn't going to work there because I love the spirit of the Mac group, and this guy came in, and his name's Bob Belleville, the bad manager who made me quit. So I wasn't able to compromise enough to stay there.
Why didn't Steve protect you?
Steve had promised to when Bud Tribble, the former manager, had left. Burl and I both almost quit, and we were afraid we'd get a bad manager, and Steve promised to protect me. But at the time, we had already essentially developed the Mac. The technical work was done, and what Steve needed at that point were managers to take over the rest of Apple. The Macintosh having shipped, his next agenda was to turn the rest of Apple into the Mac group. And he had perceived the rest of Apple wasn't as creative or motivated as the Mac team. And what you need to take over the company are managers, not innovators or technical people.
So at that moment, he felt he needed Bob Belleville more than he needed you.
That was what I thought.
Oh,
a little later on, I think he thought he needed me more. But during that time, yeah.
Oh, that's
and
nice.
of course, it kind of all backfired on him. He ended up getting kicked out of Apple just shortly afterwards.
Yeah, he sure did.
And much to the ill fate of Apple. That really killed Apple. Or almost killed Apple.
When did you first meet Bill Gates?
I met him during the course of the Mac in July 1981. I have a story in my book about that first meeting with Bill where he tried to guess how the Mac's cursor routines were working, and he guessed wrong. I was about to tell him how we had already gotten, they were software based. He thought there was some hardware for them, and we had even gotten it working on an Apple II. I was about to tell him that, and Steve Jobs saw I was about to tell him that and tried to drown me out, just saying, "Shut up," as loud as he could. That was the first time I met him, was just in the course of developing the Mac.
Didn't he later try to buy something from you? Was it Switcher?
Yes, Switcher. I also talk about that in the book. He tried to
lowball you.
Yeah. He tried to get me to brag at how fast I could write the program, so then he could apply some dollar per hour value and come up with a low price for it.
He tried to trap you.
That was before I had written the program, just when we were talking about it. So I didn't know how long it would take. But yeah, he tried to, I guess it was a common technique to use programmers' egos in order to get them to say they could do things quickly and therefore not have to pay that much.
It sounds kind of clumsy to me.
Yeah, well, it didn't work.
Well, I
got to tell the story though.
Yeah, and
what's interesting in the book is I ended up selling that very same program to Apple, and I had to also have a price negotiation with Steve Jobs over the same program, and so it really contrasts their two styles. Bill Gates is being extremely analytical, trying to figure out how many lines of code, how long that would take, how many dollars per hour you should get. Whereas Steve Jobs' approach was to just pull a number out of the air, insist it was right, and not even allow you to argue with it. Just kind of, divine interpretation or something.
So if the number he pulled was high enough, then you were happy, but otherwise...
Right. I wasn't that happy, but I was happy enough, I guess. Well, also, I knew Switcher should be bundled with the Mac, and only he could do that, so I was willing to compromise more with him than with Bill Gates. If Microsoft had owned Switcher, that would have caused a mess down the road.
Mm-hmm. Wow. We're talking about egos of programmers. Is there a programmer personality type?
There's a number of different programmer personality types, but sure. Any programmer is going to be rational, analytical. You need to because the computer is unsparing. But then there are many different areas. People who work on the user interface side of it need to have empathy as a key characteristic. Whereas if you're writing device drivers, you don't really need to understand humans that well. I would say the different types of programmers usually have different types of personalities,
and
at least to some degree.
And I remember always saying that there were hippies and there were nerds.
Yeah.
And you kind of had to have a combination of them.
Yeah. Or you can be a hippie nerd.
Yeah, that's true.
I was a nerd, but I was more of a literary nerd, artistic nerd.
Yeah, I can see that. But at the same time, with teams working closely together, personality conflicts can be a problem.
You bet.
So,
well, especially when people are idealistic and you're trying to do what you think is right, and sometimes people disagree. Yeah. And so some people's personality is such they can't really express themselves, and they just get bulldozered by whoever has the louder voice. But on the Mac team, we were passionate, and so part of it is you had to stick to your guns some. Especially Steve Jobs would, confront you and try to challenge you to say why what you wanted to do was the right thing to do. Mm-hmm. And if you were a shrinking violet, you probably couldn't get much done in an environment like that. So in some ways, it's self-selecting, a team's chemistry, and then good managers know how to make the most out of the different personality types that they could work with. Not that I've ever had a good manager.
You've never had a good manager?
Well, I have one or two. Well, Bud Tribble, say.
But I was just thinking about Bud Tribble.
It's back at Apple now.
It seems to me that there are like 25 people in the Valley. That's it, and you keep bumping into them, and and 5 of them are Bud Tribble. And if we look at Bud's path, kind of in parallel to yours, it's an interesting one because he left. Bud Tribble worked for Apple on the Apple II, and then
not on the Apple II really. He was hired by Jeff to be the first Mac programmer.
Okay.
In September of 1980.
And he came from. He was doing
an MD PhD program at University of Washington, grinding up cat brains for his PhD research.
Who wouldn't? We've all wanted to do that. He got a chance. So he took time off to come do the
right,
Macintosh.
A 1-year leave of absence because it would only take a year to do the Mac, and so about a year and a half later he had to quit the Mac to go back to finish his MD. He didn't have to. He could have stayed with the Mac, but then he would have flushed his 4 years he had already put into that program. So Bud went back, got his MD as well as his PhD. And then decided never to practice medicine. He came back to Apple, took his old job back in 1985. Actually, in the fall of '84.
My goal with this series of shows is to eventually get to all these people.
Yeah.
Because I'm going to do hundreds of these, and we'll get to them all. But the way they interact in their common experiences, I remember when Bud left Steve Jobs, after Apple, started another computer company called Next.
That's right.
And
Bud was one of the 5 co-founders.
Bud was one of the 5 co-founders. And Bud left Next under very sort of dark circumstances, as I recall, because he went to Sun.
Right.
And Steve was very... I never quite understood that. I mean, it was like, did Steve fire him, or was Steve betrayed by his departure? What was the deal
there?
Next
was having a bit of a hard time. Bud advocated the position that they should have taken earlier. Bud thought they should drop their hardware business, and they didn't want to.
The software guy wanted them to drop their hardware business.
Yeah, not too surprising. And then eventually they wouldn't. Bud sort of quit over that, or got enough at odds with them that it's hard to say whether he was quit or asked to leave. They also did a stock realignment at the time that robbed him of a great deal of his stake in the company at a recapitalization. And so that's when he went off to go to Sun, I think. And then shortly, like about 2 months after he went off to Sun, they did drop their hardware business as he had suggested they do the prior year.
Well, is that surprising, really? So they diluted the heck out of him, and then he left.
Yeah, they diluted the heck out of everybody.
Yeah. Oh, wow. Are we?
Except Steve.
So, you were in Trying for the Nerds.
Yeah.
And you did a beautiful job, I thought. And of course, Steve Jobs was in there too. And you said that there was a story that he told you.
Yeah. He came over to my house shortly after it aired, I guess in 1996. And I asked him, well, what do you think of the documentary? He said, he thought it was really great, but when he watched it on TV, he noticed his comment where he said that Bill Gates has no taste, and he thought, well, maybe he was a little too harsh, so he should call up Bill to apologize. So he got on the phone. I don't know how it works to call Bill Gates, but if you're Steve Jobs, I guess you get right through. And he said, well, Bill, I'm calling to apologize. I saw the documentary, and I said that you had no taste. Well, I shouldn't have said that publicly. It's true, but I shouldn't have said it publicly. And Bill Gates said to him something like, well, Steve, I'm glad you called to apologize, because, I really thought that was an inappropriate thing to say. And Steve couldn't help himself, and he just said, well, it's true. It's true you have no taste. And Bill Gates responded to him saying, well, Steve, I may have no taste, but that doesn't mean my entire company doesn't have taste. So Bill admitted he had no taste, but he thought it was an unfair slur to say that Microsoft has no taste.
He hires people that have taste.
Exactly.
That is funny. Oh, Lord. What is it that attracts you to open source software?
The chance for a healthy software industry. As should be apparent to everyone, and sometime in the 90s, the software industry kind of ran aground due to its structural problems. The Microsoft monopoly was choking off innovation. Essentially, Microsoft, who owned the underlying platform, was at odds with both their users and developers. They didn't want innovation. They wanted to maintain the status quo. And it's like, playing a football game when one of the combatants owns the football field and the football and the helmets. And so I was really aware of the problem, but I didn't know of any solution, because it's good for the users and developers to have a common system software base for lots of different reasons. It's bad, though, if it has proprietary control. And so when the Mozilla announcement happened and I read Eric Raymond's Cathedral and the Bazaar, I had an epiphany, which obviously is a received epiphany, not an original idea. But I realized that if the common system software base could be owned by the community of users and developers under a free software license, you can have a healthy software industry where innovation can flourish. Once I got that, I thought it was incredibly important to help make that happen. I think the historical forces are going to make it happen. It's just a question of how long will it take. And I thought perhaps I could make a contribution toward making it happen sooner rather than later. And completely independent of anything I do, I think it's progressing, and eventually we'll get there. I think the free software has been incredibly good for the industry and will continue to be.
Some people wonder, where's the business model in free software?
Well, where's
the business model?
Well, there's lots of different potential business models, but software is becoming a service, right? Software will go stale after a while. So you can at least what Easel was going to do was create a system management service. That was its business model. Because ease of use, Easel was dedicated toward making computers easier to use. Mm-hmm. Free software in particular. And it's the GUI type usability is one side of usability, but system management is really one of the places where the systems let everyone else down. You, as a computer expert, probably have to support a dozen people in your life when their system collapses on them, as it will every year or so if you're a computer user.
It's true.
And so how can we fix that? Well, the network can fix it, right? The expertise can be out there in the network, and people, I believe, would be willing to pay some, modest rate, say $5 a month, $10 a month, to get access to a stream of updates and the expertise. And I don't mean a person talking, but automated expertise.
Yeah.
And so that's one potential business model, is kind of a system management service. Perhaps it even is sold to you along with your ISP, your internet connectivity costs. But there are other ones. Like I think O'Reilly, the publisher of my book, has a tremendous free software business model that they've been very successful with, which is publish books about it.
Yeah.
Of course, not that many companies can do that. There are traditional kinds of consulting. IBM, of course, one of the largest, and as I was growing up, what I thought was one of the most avaricious companies is now firmly on the side of free software, because they see it as being very advantageous to their consulting business, which gets them the lion's share of their revenues these days.
And helps them sell hardware that the software runs on.
You bet,
well.
and is good for the customers.
Yeah.
So I think lock-in, we lived in feudal times growing up, where the platform owner was the overlord and the users and developers were the serfs. But I think we're going to transition to a time of equality and a level playing field through the free software. And I'm not saying every piece of software should be free, but the infrastructure level pieces, the more people depend on it, the more reason it is to be free. Also, the more it becomes a commodity or for long-established technical standards. If you look at the basis of the Microsoft monopoly, it's really old stuff that hasn't changed for a really long time. And so that shouldn't be a place to get great commercial leverage.
Mm-hmm. Well, that's for sure. And yet, it is. And continues to be.
Yeah. Although the world's moving away from it, you can definitely see the cracks in the dam.
Where are the cracks? Point to a crack. I agree with you,
yes.
But I'm trying to illustrate it.
Well, I would say low-cost PCs are an obvious example now. The Moore's Law has taken us to the point now where the hardware costs on a new PC could be under $100. PC could easily be sold for $200. $50 Windows license just doesn't play anymore.
Yeah.
As hardware costs go down, eventually, it just doesn't work anymore, their model. So that's one thing. In the third world, especially, you'll be seeing that. It just makes no sense whatsoever, especially if a free alternative is available. But you're also seeing it in the new range of devices. The network now has enabled computing to move off the desktop into thousands of, potentially anyway, thousands of different form factors and stuff. And so the new people, like the TiVo, for example, you're not going to build your TiVo on top of Windows. I hope. Or would it make sense for TiVo to have done that?
Are you familiar with the Eclipse 500 business jet?
No.
The Eclipse 500 is this new business jet that's coming out.
I think I am. Vern Rayburn's?
Vern Rayburn's jet.
Yeah, I do. Mike Boych, who was my partner at Easel, as well as my friend from the Mac days, was thinking of getting one of those.
Yeah, it's $1 million jet. That it's a cool idea.
But it's some setbacks, right?
No, it's going great for them. But they did have their engine. Their engine builder failed them.
Yeah.
Now they have a new engine builder, and they had to raise the price a little bit.
Yeah.
But it's essentially a flying computer.
Yes.
It runs Windows NT. That kind of scares me.
Yes. Well, and NT is no more. I would imagine they're up to XP by these days.
Well, probably. They started with NT4 or something. Yeah. But I'm nervous about an embedded Windows operating system that controls my pressurization.
Yeah, well, maybe Vern was around early enough that he gets a copy of the source code or something.
Well, I think Bill Gates has a lot of money in Eclipse,
yes.
so I'm
that's
sure that
probably why it runs Windows NT.
Of course, that's exactly it. That's the deal. So
yes.
that you have to.
They wouldn't have done that if they weren't incented to, because it made no sense.
Yeah. That's my phone, but
Okay.
we're not going to answer that.
Okay.
Okay. I wish I'd turned that off. So you did Easel, which was, from the outside, Easel was presented as a new graphical interface for Linux.
Well, we were just building on top of GNOME. Our goal was to make Linux easier to use, and part of that is work on the GUI side of things, and part of that was work on the system management. Mm-hmm. But we evaluated the alternatives and looked at different things to build on top of, and we ended up picking GNOME. Mm-hmm. And what we did in particular was create something called Nautilus, a new quote-unquote file manager. I never thought of it as a file manager because I thought of something much broader. I'd call it a graphical shell. And I thought we got about halfway done what we wanted to. And so in some ways, it's just disappointing we never got to take it as far as we wanted.
How did it feel to have to walk away from that?
Very disappointing. Obviously, when you invest, some fraction of your life working really hard, and especially when you put together a tremendous team like we did, and then to see them all have to scatter in the wind is very disappointing.
Now, what became of the code that you did develop? In an open source.
It's still used. If you get any GNOME, if you install GNOME on your machine, you'll be installing Nautilus. It's drifted away from its, it didn't live anything up to its potential. It still has some good stuff in it, but the people who took it over did not have much forward-thinking vision, and they ended up, when all else fails, just copy Windows. So it's kind of drifted into that modality these days.
Given that Windows has copied so many things in turn, that's sort of ironic. Can an independent software developer make a good living today?
Absolutely, I would think. I mean, in a variety of ways. I know many people who just, it depends how independent you want to be, but it's easy to, if you're a good programmer with a good track record, you can consult for, $150,000 a year to even more. Know lots of programmers who make that much just working for one, either company like Apple or Microsoft or smaller companies. If you're more entrepreneurial minded, you could try to set up a business. And I don't know about single programmers doing all that well, although I know a few. Like a great guy I met working on the GNOME project, Rafe Levine, who lives in Berkeley, has been maintaining a free software project and making a fairly good living at it because they sell a commercial version. He's doing GhostScript, the PostScript clone. And he sells non-GPL versions, licenses them to printer companies, and he makes a decent living.
That's interesting.
There are many examples.
It's something to think of. I'm Rafe, and my competitor is Adobe.
Yes. Well, it's Rafe plus his cohort of 100 developers scattered across.
Exactly. I wonder if John Warnock loses sleep over that. He might.
I think John Warnock is past the commercial wars these days. Maybe Bruce Chisen or whoever it is, the CEO now.
We'll have to ask that.
But Adobe's doing great as far as I can tell.
They are. They seem to have found a path there. That's really interesting.
Yeah.
Because it's hard in this environment where Microsoft is so dominant. And I attribute it to the fact that there's still room for companies that really have a technical superiority.
Yes.
Because as Adobe and Microsoft on the technology basis are just not comparable companies. Adobe could just clean Microsoft's clock any day.
Yes.
And people forget that because they think about bigger company, more money. When in fact, there's always room to be a better.
Sure,
better at doing
Adobe's a
it.
tremendous company in the center of their expertise. They're almost untouchable because they really, really care about beautiful printing.
That's right. And Autodesk, Microsoft sort of has a product,
Yes.
but that doesn't mean Autodesk is threatened by that because Autodesk, is a 800-pound gorilla in CAD.
Sure. I don't know much about CAD. I know Intuit's another example, though, of someone who resisted being devoured.
And fairly successfully, yeah, exactly. So you can do it, but it requires being so much better at your job and so much more nimble on your feet.
Right. And of course, what we don't know is the opportunity costs of the monopoly. What things would be like if there was a more level playing field today? How many, 5 times as many great companies maybe would be flourishing? I don't know.
Now, one of your great outside interests is music.
Yeah.
How is your interest in music and technology intersected?
Oh, through the digital music revolution in early 1998, I got into the MP3 thing. There was that site, mp3.com, was actually how I found out about it. And I put all my music online. I built a custom server for myself. And started with 54 gigabytes on 6 9-gig drives. Now I have over a terabyte on it, have about 7,000 works or so, and it's been tremendous for me. Not only do I do all my music listening through it, and when I go travel, it's still accessible to me as long as I have sufficient bandwidth, but I can also allow my friends to share some of it.
Wow. Where do you see this music revolution going?
Well, much along the same lines as now. Where I think the revolution that needs to take place that hasn't yet are in society's values at how to deal with it. It's something that, at least to me, music wants to be heard. If I'm an artist and I put a song out there, I want as many people to listen to it as possible. Mm-hmm. So it's not bad for me if people download it and hear it who otherwise would not. Although somehow the industry kind of thinks that's bad, and eventually, I'm not saying everything should be free, but the greatest good for the greatest number is still a good prism for deciding what's right in this world. And suing your customers seems like a lousy business strategy any way you slice it. So I think there's a lot of evolution to come around in the business models. Maybe the current record companies are toast. They certainly deserve to be. But as bandwidth is not decreasing, it's an incredible lesson. When I first was doing it I put my server together over 6 years ago. It was a little bit of a strain for, it could barely compress things in real time. Now it takes to stick a CD in there, get it all ripped and nicely compressed, under 5 minutes. Mm-hmm. And it's just a little corner of most people's hard disks. So the next thing are the movies, which have an order of magnitude more information than the things. I've started doing that as well. I've put together a movie server for myself that now has over 500 works on it.
Really?
Yeah.
Now, what is your take?
It's illegal, just because of the one of the worst laws I'm aware of, the DMCA. Says that even though I buy the DVD, I can't copy it onto my computer. But I do anyway.
I forgot. You're a criminal.
I'm a criminal in more ways than one.
Oh, well, our new Attorney General will be watching this, of course, and he'll.
Yeah, the guy who writes memos about the Geneva Convention.
Yeah, he'll determine that you are not covered by the Geneva Convention.
I'm afraid of that.
Oh well. Where do you see yourself 10 years from now?
Well, geez, I'll be over 60. I'm 51 now.
You're 51 years old.
Yeah.
So am I.
Yeah.
Don't we look good?
1953. Yeah, both of us, I think, look okay. I don't know. I'm hoping to, maybe I'll write a novel at some point in the next 10 years, but I also hope to be doing some interesting software projects as well. I see it as much the same, just, I don't know. I used to think when I was 30, I even talked about in interviews, will I be able to still program when I'm 40 and whatever? Because I think you do, and I think in some ways I've lost some of my edge as a programmer, but I've gained a lot too. So I would say I'm as effective a programmer as I've always been, but in different ways and for different reasons. And so when I'm 60, even more so, I'll be able to have a lot better computers, better tools and stuff. But I'll probably my short-term memory has been diminishing, and it'll probably be mostly gone by then or something. I don't know.
You can sense it?
Definitely. Yeah. Part of being, I was in my heyday anyway, a very fast programmer. I could get things done quickly. The way that works is to have it all in your head, so you never have to look anything up. And it's slipping away. I can already see it. I have to look things up. Now these days, I have the greatest programming tool ever devised to help me, which is Google. It's really amazing how almost any situation you're in, you can just take advantage of the collective wisdom to figure things out. Any problem you're stuck on, you're looking for the right technique or whatever, you can just access the collective wisdom of the world. That's tremendous.
Now, you've been very successful. You had a kind of an eclectic career, and a couple of the companies have not succeeded, but others have.
Yeah, I co-founded 3 companies. 2 of them went public and made money on both those that did. Mm-hmm. General Magic, which was overall, you'd have to say it added up to a failure. It didn't come close to achieving its ambitions, but I was able to, as a co-founder, I made enough money to be set.
Yeah. Do people do this for the money?
Yeah, sure. It varies.
Yeah.
The best people don't do it for the money.
Well, I guess that's where I'm headed.
Yeah.
Is what are the types?
The money isn't a good enough reason because it's not related enough to its essence to be the right motivation. So, people who come into it for the money, maybe they'll make money, but they're not going to really shake things up. It takes something else. A passion for computing is really the thing it takes more than anything else, is just a real love of what you're doing. I would say that's true of any endeavor.
Boy, that's for sure. The people who do it for the money, sometimes they make money.
Yes.
But typically they get out too soon.
Yes.
Because they say, oh, I can make $10 now, I'll take it and run. But they don't carry through the dream as far as it could go. That sort of concerns me.
Yeah, sure. Well, because their dream is a dream of money, and that's not what. Ultimately, you're a bit at odds with your customers. The more money you make, the less they have. So there is a way. That's the great thing about this industry, is you could create you could create value out of nothing. Just out of bits, I used to say my software was made out of Diet Coke, because that's what I consume a lot when drinking it. But you could turn that into real value. And free software, better yet, because then it's totally pure in a certain way. I mean, it becomes more valuable when it's free, because that freedom allows someone else to build on top of it.
Do you think that the computing platforms that we're used to physically are going to go away as processors get cheaper and cheaper and cheaper, we embed them in more things? Is it that our houses are going to come to life rather than that we're going to have a big box under the desk? Well,
it's more like the existing things don't go away as much as new venues will eventually take away some user time from them. But you'll still have something on your desk to make documents, that replaced essentially the document creation, a core thing. There'll still be desktop computers for that. You're not going to do that when you're standing up or in your car. But yeah, eventually, probably your entire living room wall will be a display. We're seeing the computers now really, for the very first time, I think, make a real contribution toward the home entertainment. Your computer is a television, the music listing, we were already talking about that. That's going to be a big thing. If it isn't already, it will be shortly. Other communications, that was one of the things General Magic was into really early. We were making a communicator when everyone else was just trying to make a handheld.
Yeah, this change from computation to communication is a big one.
Yeah, that's right. And so your telephone is going to be a computer if it's not already.
Who are your heroes?
Bob Dylan is the first one, I have to say, as I'm a big Bob Dylan fan. But Steve Wozniak and Steve Jobs, I'll put them in there along with Alan Kay. I have literary heroes too.
Who are they?
Thomas Pynchon, Don DeLillo. Ian McEwan is my latest author who I just love. Neil Stephenson, I just read his trilogy. I finished that last 850-page book in just a week. I thought it was great, too.
Who would you like most to have dinner with tonight?
I don't know. My wife, I guess. That's who I will have dinner with.
Oh, that's good.
But I mean, just in terms of meeting a fame, it was all Steve Jobs for years had promised me he'd arrange a meeting with Bob Dylan and myself. He eventually did have a meeting with Bob Dylan. He didn't include me in it. But when I thought about it, it's like, what am I really going to say to him? I read Dylan, has a tremendous biography. The first part of his biography just came out last month. And when you read it, you really see, well, gee, you don't want to, sort of impinge on his time.
Yeah.
I don't think I have anything unique to give to him, so I'd rather just leave him alone. So I guess I'd want to have dinner with someone who wanted to have dinner with me, rather than, forcing myself on someone.
Okay. Makes sense. Makes sense. Do you know Linus Torvalds?
No, I've never really met him. Although I came close a couple times. I think he's a tremendous guy, though, from everything I know about him.
Do you know his wife is the 6-time Finnish national women's karate champion?
Yes, so I've heard.
Yeah.
So
I think that says a lot. I think there's something in there. It's an interesting time we're living in, isn't it? Do you think that,
it always has been?
Yeah, but we're seeing an interaction between technology and society that's taking place on a we're operating on a global scale now. The stuff that I do for PBS. It's an American thing. We have a global audience.
Yes.
And often some of the most interesting comments come in from Australia. Those guys. And I think in a way we're a little behind the wave, and we don't understand what it is that we're doing. Do you get a sense of that?
No, I don't know that we don't. In terms of the implications of our work, we never really understand it. You're creating something to meet the need at hand. If you have a little bit of vision, maybe it can be a little broader than that. But how people will ultimately use what you do. You never can know, but nor should you, because you like to be surprised. I used to say about the Mac that the best thing about it would be the creativity of others being put into it, and it really was that way. If you knew everything that could be done with it, that's limiting. Now, in terms of the future of mankind and all of that, I don't know.
You have a new iMac on your desk here, the great big 20-inch screen one. And, when you were doing the original Mac, you had a vision of what that was and where it was going.
Right.
Is this consistent with that?
Yeah, I would definitely say so. Well, for one thing, it's an Apple, and you just take a look at that thing, it's got Steve Jobs' values just right on the surface of it. So it's you can clearly say it's something very related to what we were doing. Mm-hmm. But even if we didn't, I mean, let's say Steve had it come back to Apple and they were still making boring boxes. I thought consistently through it's actually amazing to me how much of our original intent and values stayed with the machine long after everyone who worked on it, or most of the people who worked on it, not everyone, had left Apple for years and years and years. But somehow, even Jeff Raskin, who left before the rest of us, his contribution managed to hang around for much longer than you would think possible. And I guess it's just something about the formative stages. Prepare as the next layer grows, it molds to the formation layer.
I think it's a technology vector, and the early work has a great influence on determining the direction.
Yeah. Like the Mac has a spirit, even when the company was run by Scully or Gil Amelio. That spirit of the original Macintosh was in their machines in a very distinct way compared to, say, the Microsoft machines.
Now, if we jump back to 1984 and we look at this machine today and we say that they're on a consistent evolutionary path, when did you think in 1984 that we'd have gotten to this machine? Are we late or are we early?
Some ways late and some ways early. I would say the hardware exceeded my expectations. If you do the math, you can't really envision what, a billion instructions a second was like back when we weren't even running a million. So the hardware, I think, just tremendously. But the software's been disappointing. The software, I wouldn't have imagined that the paradigms that we helped popularize with the Mac would last 10 years, much less 20 years. But today, mainly, it's still the same old stuff, where I would have thought we could do a lot better. But what I guess I didn't calculate into the formula was the stagnation of the monopoly.
You think that's it?
I think that's a big part of it. I think, for a long while there, and maybe even still the case, innovative ideas couldn't really get off the ground because of the chokehold that Microsoft had.
Well, you describe a situation in which that's resolved through open source.
Right.
But open source is in many ways an agrarian revolution. It's the farmers, it's the peasants, and that rarely works. I mean, it can establish an environment that is conducive to change, but there's usually another big hulking character who shows up and beats up the old guy, and that's certainly what Bill Gates fears is the enemy he hasn't seen, the one he doesn't know, the one that's founded tomorrow.
Sure, but if another company came in, let's say Apple was able to, for whatever reason, get into the place Microsoft's in. They might do a better job of it, but we still haven't accomplished something. If you just have a different toolkeeper, the king is dead, long live the king. I liken it more to the change from the monarchy to a democracy. Where every man is king. That's where I'd like to see things going.
I'm the king of Charleston, South Carolina.
Congratulations. I have another anecdote worth telling that I think was never said publicly.
What's that?
It's kind of an interesting story. It has to do with open source and the Macintosh, both. Which was in January of this year, the Computer History Museum had a little presentation about the marketing of the Macintosh, where they had all the original Macintosh marketing team up on the stage, and a large fraction of the rest of the Macintosh team, including myself, came and sat in the audience. They had a question and answer toward the end of it, and a guy got up, an older guy, asked a question saying he thought that Mac Paint was probably the best program ever written. Was it possible for him to see the source code? Turns out the person asking the question was Don Knuth.
Oh, Lord.
And I saw it was Don Knuth, who's another one of my heroes, just a tremendous, tremendous guy. And he came up to me afterwards. The guy on stage, Mike Murray, just didn't know how to answer that. Call Apple. I don't think so.
So Bill wasn't there? Bill Atkinson?
Bill Atkinson wasn't there.
Okay.
He was the author of Mac Paint. So anyway, Don Knuth repeated himself to me privately at the end of that, and I figured, boy, that's Don Knuth asking me for a favor. I better do as much as I can to fulfill this. So as soon as I got home, I called Bill, said, you got to have a copy of the Mac Paint source lying around somewhere. He says, nope. He had it on an old profile drive that went up in smoke 10 years ago. He doesn't have it. I said, come on, Bill, it's got to be on a floppy somewhere. And so he didn't want to have to go look through things, but I twisted his arm hard enough. And so he called me back 2 days later. He found this wooden box with floppies in it. He's got the Mac Paint source, but no machine to read a floppy. So I cobbled together an old Mac. It turns out that it's in an obsolete file format that had never shipped because it was the Lisa Monitor file format. That was just used for the development of the Lisa. So I had to write a utility to piece things together. It turns out the files weren't even encoded in text, in straight text. because in those days, bytes were precious enough that it actually used a run length encoding to get the blanks at the beginning of scan lines of source code. So, once I had got the files out, I was disappointed. All the indentation was wrong, and there were these funny control characters. And I finally remembered that run length thing, so I wrote another utility in Perl and was able to get clean, beautiful copies of the Mac Paint source. Put them on a CD, sent them off to Don Knuth. Don Knuth responded by inviting both Bill and myself over to his house, which was quite something.
He has the organ there.
Yeah, he's got the organ and all these amazing sculptures. He's got an awards chest of academic awards. It's amazing. He showed us how he works standing up in 2 different offices. And went out to lunch with him, had a great time. And he was grateful, and he really loved getting the source. But I was doing my folklore project already, and I started thinking when I got back, well, the ultimate thing of documenting the Macintosh, why don't I put the Mac Paint source code online? I started asking my friends about it and got some pretty negative feedback that, Apple would have to sue me, even though it's 20-year-old source code. It's a slippery slope. What if someone put 3-year-old source code up there? I'd be very foolish to do it. But I thought, boy, it's if it's useful to Don Knuth, it's probably useful to a lot of people, both for historical purposes and academic purposes. It's just the right thing to get that out there now. So I was thinking of, just putting it on the site, and Apple would send me a cease and desist. I'd take it down, but it would be out there then. But I was just a little too chicken. And finally, Kim O'Reilly came up with the brilliant solution when I was asking a lot of the smart people I know, what should I do about this? And he came up with the idea of donating it to the Computer History Museum as a historic artifact. It's their charter to collect such things, and perhaps they could get permission from Apple. So that's what we did. It took a few months, but let's see, when was it? I guess in August, Apple approved the donation of the Mac Paint source code to the Computer History Museum. They haven't made a public announcement yet, but thanks to Don Knuth and Bill Atkinson and some others, they did a nice tape because this was their first major software artifact in their collection, so they made it kind of a big deal of it. They did a video asking us about the development of it. But so eventually the Mac Paint source code will be available from their website to anyone in the world.
That's funny.
And we've just accomplished that this year.
And Apple can probably take a tax deduction.
Yeah, although it would be hard to value it.
Well, it's beyond
priceless.
Priceless. There we go. How are we doing for time?
We're out over there.
We're out over there.
Yep. Got an hour and 9 minutes.
We're done.
Okay.
That was fun.